Hello class, Stacy Mittler here. Here's my Module 13 capstone final reflection. Let's get right down to it. I'm going to try to hit on every trap, and we'll try to hit on every SAT used to mitigate those, but I'd like to hit on every trap. So let's get right down to it. So first we have Module 2. This was our first module. I don't know about all of you, but I was a bit nervous too, and there was a heavy focus on a lack of evidence here on my part. So one of the traps I fell into was absence of evidence bias. I took absence of evidence as actually evidence in itself. Illusory correlation, which means I took weak links or weak evidence that I had and linked them. And my briefing structure as well was framed in a way that was similar to a briefing structure of an actual terrorist attack. And we, if you recall, we weren't sure whether it was or not. So this work in Module 2 would have benefited from a key assumptions check, maybe analysis of competing hypotheses, and of course, devil's advocacy. Let's move on to that big assignment, Module 3. I fell prey to availability heuristic here and assumption drift. This is where we saw our sit reps begin, and you'll be able to see throughout this presentation how my sit reps, the thing that I did not think would influence my work, actually really did. So it's interesting to see how these two play together. As well as far as availability heuristic goes, I overemphasized the vandalism that was supposedly committed by the pack. This then carried on to my sit rep, where I had that same assumption, and I committed assumption drift, where the pack, well, I assumed the pack was central to all protests risks, and this centrality to protest risk kind of carries on throughout the capstone. All right, some things to help that and to mitigate those risks would have been indicators of signposts of change, even on my sit rep, and even a key assumptions check. Let's move on to Module 4. Now, this was the stakeholder map. I don't know about you, but I really wanted to make sure this was comprehensive, and I found out early on in the capstone that I had a need to want to solve things and fix things, and I wanted to be safe. Well, that's not necessarily working in my favor here. So I fell prey to reliance on assumption and proportionality bias. So I assumed that Detroit and the Denver incidences were linked and that they were larger scale than they actually were. And this assumption that the threat was more severe led to me wanting to share intelligence with a lot of different stakeholders. And maybe we didn't need all those stakeholders. And an intelligence project that shares a lot or overly shares, it could have caused undue panic and unrest. So if I would have practiced a key assumptions check, maybe even high impact, low probability analysis, I would have been more calibrated as to who was on this stakeholders map and who I communicated with as an intelligence analyst. Let's move on to Module 5. This module included a sit rep as well, but it was the module where that video purported to be by ISIS surfaced, and the question of the authenticity came into play. The way I framed my intelligence question was, what hallmarks of this video share the same hallmarks of an authentic ISIS video? I fell prey to confirmation bias here in clustering illusion patternicity. There was a connection that I made between the Denver attack, ISIS, and the pack. And the entire product was weighted on the fact of video authenticity, leaning more towards the fact that it might have been authentic. If I looked at the fact that it might not have been, and this might have been sympathizers, I may have missed something very important and a specific threat. So my innate need to want to solve things led to these traps I fell into. I could have benefited from a quality information check as well as analysis of competing hypotheses. Let's move on to Module 6. As you can see here, this is with a bunch of stuff happened in the scenario. A bunch of people came into town. We have some like the Lollapalooza, the G20 protesters, London-based hooligans, anti-pack, all these different things. And I fell prey to information overload trap in this because I treated everything as important. And this can be dangerous because actions and intelligence need to be prioritized. And if there is too much going on, you can't really prioritize things. So key intelligence questions review would have really helped me to produce a more cohesive product that had more of a focus to where I realized I didn't have to focus on everything. Next, we have Module 7. This was the personal presentation assignment. It was really interesting to look back on this. I created for my personal presentation a teachable machine model that identified tattoos, clothing logos, and other things, because we had all these protests going on, and we can identify these folks that are in town and if they were doing things or not. So this was really evident to me that there is no way to mitigate personal bias or human bias in AI or in machine learning models. I tried to make this a very robust model. I think I did a good job with it. I entered, I believe it was over 1,500 different images into it to make it really robust. However, it never escaped my own biases, and there was no way for it to. Paired with that, I fell prey to mirror imaging, because I assumed that those folks that were coming into Detroit were going to act similarly to those that were there. They were going to protest. They would do other things. If I hadn't fallen prey to mirror biases, I might not have even chosen this particular project. So it was flawed. This was influenced by my sit reps as well. So maybe doing a cultural behavioral assumptions check along with red teaming would have mitigated these biases. All right, let's move on to Module 8. So here you can see the map that I actually created in my final product. And it's actually quite clustered, jumbled. So I fell prey to clustering, illusion, and confirmation bias and information overload trap again. So I wanted to think creatively in this assignment. I'm sure all of you did, and I really wanted to think of something different. And so when I was doing red teaming analysis, I thought the way that I would attack a group is to attack their food supply. So I decided to map out halal food productions. I also decided to map out Muslim banking institutions as well as Muslim institution of higher learning, or places where it had large chapters of that. So I assumed there was a connection amongst these communities without valid confirmation. That assumption that these communities were particularly vulnerable also came into play, and that overload played into everything is important dynamic. So this was also fueled by the information I had put into my last sit reps. So what would have helped here is maybe an analysis of competing hypotheses, indicators of signposts of change, maybe in these neighborhoods or where these markers are if something actually happened, and maybe some structured timeline analysis. All right, let's move on to Module 9. So this was an assignment with key judgments and taskings, and although I really focused on to make this a robust intelligence product, I used the Intelligence 203 directive, and it did help clarify things. But I did fall prey to early assumptions in my sit rep. I created a link chart in my sit rep in Module 7 or 5, and I added to it. Now, I didn't modify it and necessarily change it, but I added to it. So these assumptions carried over into the work, and it continued to reference prior occurrences. I also failed to put weight into alternative actors and alternative motivations. What would have helped me here would have been red team analysis, key assumptions check, maybe analysis of competing hypotheses. All right, let's move on to Module 10. This was a great one to analyze as well. We had our group projects then, our group project red teaming analysis. Our group, I think we posed a great argument. We worked really well together. And we were tasked with arguing that the PAC's tactics of mobilization were just as, were similar to jihadists and just as dangerous. And although we were assigned a specific comparison, my group, and we made a great argument, we fell into historical analogy trap and overgeneralization. Now that makes sense. If you're comparing two groups, you would take what they did in the past and compare them. It's a logical way to argue. But I think our argument would have been better focused if we utilized indicators and signposts of change, took specific things that were different, that still played into this argument, that could have bolstered a strong argument. All right, we are in Module 11 now, and this is the final module we're going to analyze here. So the culmination of the scenario and the influence of the sit reps really played into the work I produced here. So you could see I wanted to make connections. I had an innate need to solve things. Maybe it was an innate need to help people. I'm not sure. But that led to an initial lack of precision and clarity in my final intelligence product. When I started it, in order to organize my thoughts, I identified rather intelligence gaps as instances in the scenario. After feedback, I went ahead and changed that, and then I had a more comprehensive product. So you could see that past instances and events did influence my work, as well as clustering illusion, maybe linearity bias, which is drawing a line between events that I don't necessarily have confirmation of. So it ended up being a good product in the end, but SATs like multiple hypothesis generation, link analysis with source validation would have really helped, as well as another key intelligence questions review would have helped the final product. So I would really like to thank all of you for the time we spent in this capstone class. I learned a great deal from you. It's been an honor. I'm open to any questions you have. Take care and stay safe.